So just a background. So I'm a university professor, but working also at DFKI. And DFKI is one of these public-private partnerships where essentially I'm an in-kind donation from the university as a contribution to DFKI, right? And DFKI is doing a lot of industry projects. How it relates to education also in research is that in Germany you really have this model that you don't have PhD studies mostly, right? So at DFKI is a research center, and people working for me are junior researcher. All of them are doing a PhD, but very often they don't even register with the university for PhD until they submit, right? So PhD education is really research education. I strongly believe it is the right thing to do. What you do need to actually add to that education as formal courses, what you mentioned, things like ethics, in AI, possibly something like HCI, right? Because they typically I would not care about that. And you essentially need to, right? You need to essentially, this is being deployed and let loose on the populace. It's really important to design them correctly. Yeah. In terms of education for the global marketplace, global interaction, I think that actually this sort of research project like PhD is really nice because at least at DFKI, every of those projects is something like a publicly funded project with many partners. Some of them are industry. I'm a big fan of this European project, when the student comes somewhere and then there's a guy from some very, very deep German province. I have this people where I was at a university, right, and has to go to a EU meeting with an Italian, a Norwegian, and a Swiss, right? And one of them is a doctor, the other one is, and that's really, you see them grow. And these are the people who then in the end are really, you can send them to industry and they can do something, right? They can compete. They still don't really see the world outside Europe. I lived a long time outside Europe, so I understand that we live in a bubble, that not understanding a lot of the world outside is sometimes different. Now, coming to education and research in Gen AI, I think it's really interesting because actually I think that teaching Gen AI in terms of using Gen AI is something that is not as much at a PhD level, but actually I believe it belongs more on a primary school level. Right? Actually, I teach my kids to use that, and that is another thing that is really big because actually Gen AI is one of the things that democratizes AI really, really strongly, right? Because you can do stuff you couldn't do before with much less formal education, but if we're very careful, because I think it's important not just to let people know which website to go to use Gen AI, but to provide an education about what that thing does and what it doesn't. Yes. And it's interesting because kids, at first contact I had with Gen AI was actually through my son, who is studying computer science. And, when I search for this problem, I use this stuff, right? Because I'm not looking in. And some of those kids really intuitively see it, right? They understand, like they grew up with YouTube, and a lot of them understand YouTube is 80% bullshit. They still watch it because they like it. Right? But then they understand anything you get online is not necessarily true, but that needs to be educated. Once you do that, and you have to start early, those are tools, and I think it's a big opportunity also for the world outside Europe, right? Yes. Because you can do things you couldn't do, right? You can all those things can help you teach, and you do things you couldn't do before, and I think that's the emphasis. Whereas developing Gen AI, right, diving deeper into this, how do you do it with small computational resources? Those are things that require research and actual collaboration between Europe and countries outside Europe, and I think that is interesting.
Thank you so much, Paul. And last but not least, Yannis is going to tell us also about how Gen AI is affecting research.
I agree that Gen AI, I'm supposed to talk about how to educate researchers. But it may start much earlier. I absolutely agree with Paul on this. And when I saw the assignment, I said, okay, researchers in AI itself, so they develop new algorithms, they develop new techniques, methodologies, or researchers in computing in general that may use AI, or researchers in any field that use AI. I won't talk about the first kind, so the heavy core AI, and some of them are in this room, but I'll talk about doing other research and using Gen AI. First of all, many researchers, at least in computing, system researchers have to code. These are the most successful. You build systems. And we have to be teaching them already from undergraduate level, at least, if not earlier, how to code in the new programming language called prompts. That's the way it is kind of happening a little bit, cautiously and so on, but down the line, much of the coding will be done in the language called prompts. Of course, you have to understand what the correct software that comes out is, so that you have to still learn the basics. But this is important. And in my last course last semester, one of the assignments was do it in prompts, and if I realize that you wrote part of the code, then you're kicked out of class, whereas usually it is if you use help, you're kicked out of class. So, and it was an experience. Currently, you cannot give them a big thing, build it, and then it will do it. You have to break it down in pieces, but it's working. But coming to the let's say, educating a researcher, starting from undergraduate level and masters. I don't know about courses at the PhD level, but anyway, Gen AI will play a big role. And I looked at the ACM is the leading society for coming up with the standard undergraduate curriculum. And just a few months ago, CS 2023 came out, 10 years after the previous version, with a EEE, AAAI, and so on. And the knowledge area, artificial intelligence, is much, much bigger compared to the past. And in fact, as this was being developed, AI was going so fast that they were changing it continuously. And now in the description of this knowledge area of artificial intelligence, Gen AI is mentioned 18 times in a document that, that says how AI should be taught. Gen AI in vision, Gen AI in natural language processing, and so on. So this is at the core of what all these committees that formed that talked about the need to develop Gen AI. And it's, for me, I mean, there's a huge hype of AI. I think you mentioned it in your previous panel, how things have come and gone, or maybe it was Barry that was mentioning it. And I'm a data guy, so I'll say something about data now, but I'm not biased. I think I'm quite objective. AI without data is useless. Okay, it is if you have a car, whether it's a Yugo or a Lamborghini, it doesn't matter, that you don't put oil in it. The correct kind of oil to run. So curriculum and developing researchers by just teaching them the algorithms and techniques and tricks of AI without teaching them data science is really doing a disservice to the researcher. And because the right type of data will make a difference on whether the AI will give you something. And algorithmic bias and data bias is critical